Hello again, this is Ben Hitchcock Cross talking to you today for Deliberate Indifference Wisconsin with Deb Kuether here. And this is a bit of a change. We're going to do an interview here of Deb Kuether. She's our primary source here today, so congratulations for that.
Thanks.
We are going to, this is sort of the first half of the arc of the Matt White 30-day stay, okay? And so what does that mean? Matt White is the head of the Division of Investigations for the Equal Rights Division. Okay, so this is the people who hear discrimination complaints. There's an investigatory process. He's in charge of the investigatory process. Well, we intersected with Matt White in two different ways, and I want to be clear when I say we mean Debbie Kuether. So, number one, he handled a public records search that Debbie did for records of other people who did complaints, which is sort of the start of this whole journey here.
Yeah.
And at the same time, he was responsible for issuing a 30-day discovery stay to Milwaukee Public Schools, which meant that although they had questions, interrogatories, discovery, documents that they had to give us, they got 30 days out of not the judge, because there was no judge, but Matt White. So one of the things that came out of that was we got a judge, but this is sort of the story of about all that and how that happened. So the first half, we're going to sort of get into the public records end of things, and really this is sort of the quest for getting the Dr. Jeremiah Holliday complaint. As far as I understand that, Dr. Jeremiah Holliday, and I've seen the complaint, so that's how I understand it, filed a complaint against Milwaukee Public Schools and specifically Keith Posley. There's a good deal of discussion in that in at least one of the deposition videos. I think Calvin Furman's.
Calvin's.
Yeah. So that's there. So you can look at that for yourself and listen to it. I think most of it's up there right now. So the point is that he filed a complaint against Keith Posley for race discrimination and discrimination against him because his wife worked for the DPI, the Department of Public Instruction.
She not only worked for the DPI, sorry to interrupt, but she was the state superintendent's liaison that worked specifically with Milwaukee Public Schools in the area of academics, which was the area that her husband was the chief of. So let's just make sure we put that little piece in there.
Well, good, because I was sort of hesitating there because I was thinking of all the different ways she intersected with this case, Milwaukee Public Schools and curriculum and instruction, in particular, Dr. Holliday's area. So
right.
That was sort of, I was admiring the coincidence, I think that was fair to say. So you got a chance to get a word in edgeways. So that
good
was
point,
nice.
yes.
Okay. And also, I was thinking of the date that she resigned from the Department of Public Instruction. I thought was also fairly significant. We've recently discovered that date is what?
February 4th, 2022.
Okay. So that's short months after what we're talking about here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I am going to hopefully do a lot less talking, and hopefully we can interview our primary source here. So, and then one of the reasons that we can talk about this, and I want to be clear, is that this isn't about Debbie's case in terms of, the 30-day stay and how that interacted with that is, but that issue sort of over with here. Really what's going on is Debbie is coming as a citizen asking for public records. Okay, so it may be true that these public records are related to your case, Dr. Kuether's case. It may be true that they're helpful for opening other, for looking at it from a wider lens, right, and looking for patterns and all these things, which is sort of what we're doing here. But the fact is that any citizen can ask for any public record for any reason, or no reason at all, frankly.
Right. Yeah.
So you don't have, if they ask you, you don't have to give one, and you didn't have to have any purpose at all. You could just be interested in what's going on for statistical purposes or no purposes. So that I want to make clear that you're going there not as someone who's making a complaint. I mean, I think it's clear that they knew that you had a complaint that was pending when you went there, right? So is that fair to say or no?
They did know that, yes, because my name was on the list that came up.
Okay.
Yes.
And, I mean, not many people walk into the ERD and asking for public records, I'm sure.
I caught them off guard.
Right.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to let you tell your story, but I just want to be clear that this is something that she's not telling this story as Dr. Kuether complainant. She's telling this story, I guess, as Debbie Kuether, citizen of Wisconsin.
Okay. Yes, and that's what I had went in. I wanted to make a trip in person to DWD because I was learning about open records, and I had heard from conversations in my neighborhood, in discussions that I was having, that Dr. Holliday himself had filed a complaint. And
when was this?
I heard this early, probably in August, September of 2021.
Okay. And then when did you go to make the records request?
I went on November 15th of 2021, and I chose that day because I was in the middle of an interview with a news station, and I heard a cluster of people talking about open records and how media does open records, and they were talking about how sometimes they go to the length of even going there in person, but oftentimes they don't because they don't have time. And so I was overhearing this conversation, and I thought to myself, I've never gone in person, and I have the time. So I could make that trek. And so that's what kind of propelled me to go the very next day on the 15th to make this in-person public open records request.
Okay. And this is sort of like your first media, I guess the presence came out in February or something like that?
It came out I believe maybe the end of January so I had not been on the news yet.
Okay. And but so that's going to happen, and you're being interviewed on 11/14.
Yes, that I was interviewed on that date.
Okay,
but it wasn't released until a little bit later.
It wasn't released for 2 months later. Just to back up so we get the context here, do you know when the Calvin Furman, Posley, Marla Bernay complaint came out?
This is right at the same time. Calvin Furman was beginning to make internal complaints to Dr. Holliday in written form in October of 2021.
Right.
And then in November and December, he had put things to the board, as well as Matt Chasen, official things in writing that were of a whistleblower complaint nature.
Right. It's my understanding that that's the exact same day. So the same day that you went to Matt White is the same day that, let's say that Calvin Furman went to Matt Chasen.
Yes, so there's a lot of business going on in that time frame. Right.
Okay.
That's very heated and active.
And I mean, I guess we don't know, but it's fair to assume that the media is doing some sort of checking back with their sources and MPS, and there's some sort of, that there's some heads up at least that they're talking to you.
I would think there's a high likelihood that there's enough of a scurry going on that they are recognizing the bubbling of the media and the intersection of my case.
And you're, just in terms of your probable cause determination doesn't come out until when?
January 27th of 2022.
Okay, and when was the last thing that's filed in there? That's a little bit before then, right? Do you know when they filed their response to your...
The MPS position statement mine was actually, we got that in September of 2021.
Okay, so that's when they're doing all the investigation on your case.
Yes, and so, right, so that does intersect with the, Holliday is making his...
Well, and presumably 30 days later, so sometime in October, were responding to MPS's positions.
Correct. Yes,
okay.
that's what that did happen.
So all of these things are going on within like the same month.
Right, so their officers at the Equal Rights Division, their employees there, the ones that Matt White intersects with, are doing this investigative work simultaneously.
That's a really
as
good way
I'm
to put
coming
it.
in to
Right.
request things. So I'm in my opinion, I think they had a lot of alarms going off that day.
All right, so we're not even to the story yet, but I
Okay.
think it's fair to say that at MPS, at ERD, and at Dr. Kuether, there's a lot of things that are all going on simultaneously.
Yes.
Okay.
That is very hard to miss.
Okay.
And the level of Dr. Holliday, you have to remember too, or the people. He's a chief, so they invoke some external things with that layer of
He's
position.
upper management.
Right.
Is what we're talking
So
about.
you have to have certain people that don't have a parallel or lower position, like investigating him and working with people in the Milwaukee Public Schools and the Equal Rights Division. There's a layer of hierarchy that they have to invoke that they don't have to do many times when it's just a person that is not a chief.
Right, and the Dr. Kuether complaint is directed at Jeremiah Holliday for sure, but it's also directed at Keith Posley.
True.
Right? I mean, that's fair to say. And even as my reading of it, as somebody who helped write it, I would say there is the Holliday sort of as a bad actor and original discrimination leads you to then go and make complaints about his behavior directly to Calvin Furman. And as a result of that activity, ultimately, Keith Posley himself said that you need to get an attitude adjustment, or I forget.
Reset. I need a reset.
Okay. You need to get reset in your behavior, and then they forcibly transferred you to
The basement,
basement of Washington High School.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's exactly how that happened. And Keith Posley is mentioned in those quotes you just said too, specifically in my complaint.
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
that's
So-
not new. Yeah.
Right, but what we're doing here is tying the dates and the facts and all these things are,
Yes.
there's a melange, if you will, a
Yes.
mixture. Okay, so on this date here, November 15th, you go to Matt White. Where's this located?
So I went to the Madison office.
Okay.
And I went in the main door. It was still during COVID times, so it was very sparse in terms of activity that was going in there. The person, his name is Rusty, that's the individual who was working at the reception desk,
Okay.
did try to tell me, hey, you shouldn't even bother being here. You should do this stuff electronically. And I was like, no, I made the trip. I've got the time. I do know that if, I make a request, you have to fill it while I'm sitting here. And I haven't had success getting things, other ways. So I'm going to stay with you today and do an open records request.
So you had made open records requests to the public records request to the ERD before that.
I actually don't know if I had. I think maybe I had.
Okay.
The majority of my public records at that point were through Milwaukee Public Schools. So I was
That
a little
makes
bit of a
sense.
newbie, but I might have made a couple at DWD too.
Okay, but I mean, you didn't know that necessarily that it was going to be faster in person, but that was an assumption at that point.
Well, I knew that from discussions from people that I talk with about open records.
Okay. So, did you have just some names? Did you have case numbers? What kind of information did you have about what you were looking for?
So I came in and I was actually making an oral request, and then the individual Rusty behind the reception desk said, you need to write these down.
Okay.
So at that point, I made sure to do a couple of things. I made sure to sign in with my real name and put the purpose of why I was there that day, open records,
Okay.
which they later lost. They don't have the sign in.
How do you know that?
Because I asked for it in open records.
Okay.
I asked for the sign-in from the reception desk on that day, and they said they did not have a sign-in. Then Rusty gave me several pages of blank notebook paper that he took out of a notebook and said, here, use these. And I wrote down I would write a request, and the first request I had, I just asked for 2019, 2020, 2021, all ERD complaints with the respondent, Milwaukee Public Schools, or doing business as Milwaukee Public Schools. That was my first filter.
And right, because everybody knows them as MPS, right?
Right. Okay. But I did know already going there that, because I knew that sometimes they use a different name too. So Jose's had been under board of directors, so I wanted to say the bigger request to include any entity that's doing business as Milwaukee Public Schools.
Okay, Jose is who?
Oh, I'm sorry, Jose Garcia Hoven.
Okay, and he, you know him because he works in curriculum instruction.
Right, we are colleagues, and because we were going through similar challenges at the same time, we thought partnered a lot. Okay. And I actually had Jose's case. So, like, I had his complaint, I mean.
Complaint, okay.
So I knew it existed. There was no question. I had the case number. I had the file.
And when you're going there, are you asking them for the complaints? Are you asking for a list of the complaints? Are you asking for more, both, what?
So first I asked for all of the complaints by those 3 years. And so my filters were the 3 years and Milwaukee Public Schools, or any entity that the respondent is Milwaukee Public Schools, doing business as Milwaukee Public Schools. They came back and they did give me a list. On that list, I found it fascinating because...
So that he went and printed it out and brought it to you.
Right. So by this time, Rusty had gotten another person working there. He said, I have to go find somebody because, again, this was COVID time and many people were not even in the office. But he said, I have to find somebody to work with you. So he directed me to work with Matt White. And Matt White would come out of his office area. He'd come to the reception area, and he and I would confer after each time I produced a written request. He would come back with the results, and we would have a lengthy discussion about it, because I would then ask a lot of questions about what it is that he brought to me. So in his first return back to me, he brought a list that had, I'm going to say, it was 2 pages, and it had about maybe 30-ish case of numbers on it, like the last name, their case number, and then in the right-hand column, it had what phase of investigation it was in.
Okay.
And then I noticed, I said, well, this doesn't look like everything, so I wrote another request by paper, and I put 4 names on it.
Okay, and it didn't look like everything because there were names.
Everything wasn't on there.
You knew that there was complaints that were outstanding that existed that weren't on that list.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I knew that for 100%. Yes. Okay.
And
so,
why? I assumed you challenged him on that. How did you challenge him on that time?
So I wrote so I didn't challenge him quite yet, but I wrote the challenge down. Okay. And by the way, I was getting advice by a couple of people by phone in between, and they were coaching me on how to navigate the filtration of this information so that the parameters of it would always kind of come back to how can we rule out any kind of excuse that they're going to give us in the future. So we were doing that work right there on the spot.
Which is, just if I can pause there, that's something that you have to do with public records from time to time, because you can't simply ask a question, okay? So you can't say how many prisoners have made complaints against the Department of Corrections in such and such a year, and they don't give you back the answer's 42. Okay, what you have to do is say, give me all of the complaints that prisoners have made in such and such time period, and then you have to do the work of counting them. Or you might say, give us all the reports, the year-end reports, if you know that report exists. Okay, so the rule for that, and this is the law, and I'm not giving you legal advice here, because I don't know what your situation is, but I can say that it's very simple and straightforward. It's in the Attorney General Manual, and there's a case on it. It says they don't have to create a record. Okay? So what he's doing here, this is Matt White is doing for Debbie, is creating a record. Right? So there was not necessarily the spreadsheet that existed. okay? So he's coming and giving you this information, okay? You could have asked for the report. You could have asked for it all sorts of different ways. I'm sure he's also motivated to not have you in his lobby and other reasons like that why it went down that way, right? But had you been corresponding, sending emails back and forth, it probably would have been different. But he doesn't have to necessarily give you a new report if that report didn't exist before.
Right, he doesn't have to create anything that's not there.
Right.
Open records is just that. It has to be something that there's already a record of. It's not on them to create something new for your request.
So you have to, if you want to ask a question and you want to get a better answer, you have to sometimes have an initial request, and then say, okay, based on that response, I'm either going to narrow my request, I'm going to change the person that I'm talking about, I'm going to do whatever, okay? Because if you ask for
That's how you do
a
it.
large group of things, okay, and something doesn't seem right, and then you can start to focus on, I'm just trying to think of something easy, but if they say something didn't, there's no record of this happening, and that thing doesn't exist, right?
Well, this is a perfect example of that. So, because I got a big list of names, then I noticed the names that I was looking for weren't on there. So then I'm thinking to myself, how can I be more direct? Because maybe the wording that I chose, the time frame I chose, wasn't within the parameters of their search, so I'm going to get even more specific. And in my next request, I asked for just 4 complaints, copies of 4 people's complaints.
Well, so that's okay. So that's something that's interesting, because I guess I have another example. Because what's happening here is it doesn't sound like they're giving you the accurate response. Okay, so what we're trying to focus in on is using, I guess before we move on to what happened, is just using public records and asking more and more narrow questions to get the specific answer. Okay, so let's say, and the one that I'm thinking of now is you want to know who's the one that's making the decision. Okay, so for whatever reason, the person, they're not giving you specific, they're exempting specific records because they say it's because of a lawsuit. Okay, so you've got emails from 5 different people, and that they don't tell you which ones are exempted, but there's something that's exempted because of a lawsuit. Okay, so leaving aside whether or not that's a good exemption, if you were to ask for it by the first person, by the second person, by the third person, by the fourth person, by the fifth person, based on their response for each one of those questions, you can narrow down who's actually making the decisions, okay? But that only works if they're actually playing fair, right?
And that's why I wanted to really work through this. And that's where their frustration probably came with me, is because I wasn't just leaving. Every time they came back with something, I came up with another way for them to go back and present. And I just stayed there. I said, I have all day, I can stay there. And so I then asked for the next layer, which, again, you could not get any more specific. So I asked for Jeremiah Holidays, asked for complainant by name.
Okay.
Jose Garcia Hoven, Marla Brunau.
Okay.
And then there was a 4th one that I asked for that is not relevant to this information or this Milwaukee Public Schools case, but I knew that one existed too because I had that copy too. So I had 2 of the copies that were on there, and I already had them in hand. I just was, but the
Testing.
I was testing, and I was putting in filters that I knew if they said no to one, they couldn't use that excuse to say no to the others.
That's a valid, if they're not playing fair, that's a valid method to test out. And I've done that before. It's a variant on that one is there'll be public records between 2 different public entities. Okay.
Okay.
So I'll ask, like, say, the county and the city, and I'll ask the county for one set, and I'll ask the city for the other set, and then we'll see what we get.
Yeah, and I bet that yields a lot of very interesting comparisons.
Yes.
Yeah. So I did that, and they came back, and they did not have, they gave me one responsive record, which was the record for the non-MPS person that I had requested, and came back and said, none of these people are in our database. And I said, what's very interesting is because I had it written down is Matt White and I had a lengthy conversation. I literally said to him, you mean this person's not in there? This person is not in there. I went name by name and he said, they are not in there. And so then we went off and we had another discussion about the paper that I had in my hand.
And I'm sorry, at this, I just remembered a fact that is probably of note here. At this time, it's either the day before or possibly the day before that, they had just closed, meaning Matt White's office had just closed out Dr. Holliday's complaint.
Yes. And not only that, but some agency was conducting a very thorough investigation on Marla Brunel.
Right.
But, we still don't know where that lives. So there's some kind of, major investigation that involves her that nobody has been able to say who was the investigating agencies, how did, who's doing this stuff.
Meaning Department of Public Instructions won't admit that there's such an investigation, for example.
Nobody is admitting
and
it.
And the ERD won't admit that there's
But we know it's happened because
Okay.
we have documents that show that.
Right.
But they, it's like it didn't happen. We're supposed to ignore this huge thing. And that's what they were doing at this time, even more so than they are now because, I didn't have some of those reports at the time. But
right, and so we don't know if there's a grand conspiracy or not, but we do know that in these months, October specific, and especially November and December, when things like the Calvin Furman complaint is going to the board, when the stuff like the Holiday report, complaint is being wrapped up by the ERD, there is, and the Marla Brunei complaint is coming out, that's what the Calvin Furman thing is. These documents that would normally be public records elsewhere just don't seem to exist.
yes, and they told me they don't exist when I specifically asked about them. And I also had a discussion with Matt White at that same time frame about retaliation. And he showed me on the document how you can tell if a complaint is very likely to be retaliation. Like if there's usually about a year of time between this, he said if you see the same name here and then you see the same name lower on the list, and there's about a year's passage of time, you can almost guarantee that that's going to be a retaliation claim. And we went through and talked about several instances of that. So
And at this time, when you're talking to Matt White, you have a pending decision about your initial probable cause determination, right?
yes, a
Right.
pending.
Pending.
It wasn't released until January, but because it was funny, I said on mine, I pointed up, mine was high on the list because it was a newer one. I said, but mine isn't like that. Mine is a retaliation one, and I don't have 2 complaints because I did mine internal. I didn't do 2. And he goes, yeah, yours is different. So we chuckled about that.
Well, so he had knowledge of yours.
Well, I would think it seems that he would, not only because I drew my attention to my name being on the list.
Right.
But, I don't know if he was just taking what I said at that moment as, yeah, you're right, your name isn't on the list twice.
Right.
Or, yeah, you're right, yours is different.
Well, we've got an email that tells them us about how they think it's different, but we'll save that for part 2. We'll just tease that a little bit.
Yeah.
So, it's fair to say you spent a good deal of time there that day, and you came back with only 2, but not with what you were looking for, right? It's not the Holiday complaint.
I did not have what I was looking for. Because the Holiday complaint was the whole reason I drove there.
Right.
I wanted to have that in hand, and I was a little disappointed that even despite all my filtering techniques, I walked out empty-handed.
Okay, so I'm just gonna guess that you didn't take that as the final result. Did you start following up on that?
I wanted to immediately memorialize the what happened that day.
Always a good technique.
Immediately, because I just knew the things that they were telling me, because I knew that because I had the complaints in hand, and the fact that they weren't showing up on these reports was a signal to me that something is being hidden.
And so at the risk of being a little long-winded, can you just sort of explain what your strategy is for memorializing a conversation?
I write an email summarizing in very big detail what transpired.
Okay.
And I send that to the other party.
I don't know if you did this or not, but one thing I would add to that is if there was any promises made, or even things that are something like a promise, deliverables in any way, I really would encourage everybody to headline those, put those as bullet points on the
Right.
bottom. Just make, if you went to a meeting and your boss promises you something and you need to memorialize that, make sure you put that
Right.
in the
Yeah.
the
As a
promise.
reminder, I'm looking forward to the following pieces that we discussed. Boom, boom, boom. Right. And that's exactly what I do as a practice all the time, too. So I did do that with this director of investigations, because he seemed very receptive to engaging with me, although I don't think he thought I was going to get to the level of specificity of questioning that I did. So in other words, when he would tell me, okay, thanks, Debbie, for your visit, you didn't do this during your visit, which is why,
Right.
you might, and I would say, well, no, remember, like,
Right.
I handed you, I recounted exactly what we did that day.
And so, one of the reasons to do that isn't to like sort of trap somebody and get them. The whole concept is there is this oral conversation and we're going to get it written down. Okay. And so that does two things there. And probably more, but it gets down your version of events down on the paper, and then, which is really good because a lot of times these are unequal power situations. It sort of puts an onus, a burden, an opportunity on the superior party to correct whatever it is that they feel is wrong. Okay. And then that gives you an even better opportunity of understanding what it is, what the issue is, or now let's say you're then now clear on what they actually meant as opposed to what they said.
It's a very good tool to flesh out and make sure both people are operating from the same understanding. And it's needed because, like you just said, there are times when somebody says something and it's, misunderstood. And then there are other times you have to flesh out whether or not it is a misunderstanding or whether this person is trying to
Exactly.
be deceitful or evasive, for lack of a better terms there.
And part of what you were just saying too is it cuts off a couple of chances for them to say, well, I thought you meant this, well, I thought you meant that. We're already past the, well, I thought you meant, right? So at least it gets you, it cuts through a few layers.
And
Yeah.
I think that signals to them, which they don't really necessarily appreciate maybe, but they don't like to be held to a certain story, And so it's they notice when the other side is pushing for that. And so that's when the games really start to heat up.
Okay, so you're past, well, I thought you meant. What next do they say?
So they gave a lot of different, they being Matt White, I should say, and he's the DWD ERD, Equal Rights Division. So he first said, so when we were talking through how could we possibly have not gotten to what I was asking for, what were our misunderstandings, first he said something about, well, Jose Garcia Hoven's complaint is in as Milwaukee Board of School Directors. I didn't look for that filter. I just looked for Milwaukee Public Schools. So then I actually did a variety of things to like challenge that, where I said, okay, well then give me a list of the two things. I want to see who's on the board and who's on Milwaukee Public Schools. He didn't do that.
Okay.
Instead, he said, well, I've fixed it now. So in the future, we won't have that issue of somebody, not having, I fixed that. So then I was kind of like, okay, great, you
Is
fixed
that
that.
sort of like a crumb?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah,
We're
like-
I'm going to give you something, but it's not really for you.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
for the future.
Yeah.
And like if you don't, you're not really for all complainants.
Yeah, like this will never happen again
Okay.
because, so then I was
You
like,
should be
okay,
happy
great.
with
Right,
progress.
I should be happy about that.
Okay.
Then I said, well, that really doesn't hold water because I asked for it by name too.
Okay.
And I said, I asked for these 4 names. I said, I didn't misspell any of the names. I know exactly how to spell the names. And you still came back without having those on there. So I still don't get it.
And this is a series of emails?
Yes, it is. This is all an email.
Okay.
And he said, well, there was, there was a technical glitch that happened, because then I even said, well, I even asked for it by case number. And I wrote the case number in the email again. And this was the next day. I said, can you confirm that this case number doesn't exist? Well, Ms. Kuether, there is a technical glitch that's in progress right now. And we've fixed the technical glitch. There was an upgrade in software, and I said, okay, well, I made an open records request about that. I said, can I ask for the upgrade that you made? Like, what internal emails did your tech team? That it doesn't exist. No responsive records.
I thought they gave you the same emails about you talking about.
They gave me the same chain of emails.
Right.
But then I said, you just gave me the same chain of emails. I'm asking for your tech person talking to Matt White saying, oh, our computer problem is the issue here, not you.
Right.
It's all on the computer's end. There was nothing
some
related to
email,
that.
some text, some anything, handwritten note saying now this problem is solved.
Right.
Hey, fix it. No, it doesn't exist. Okay. So, but you did get the record.
On December 23rd, so 3-4 weeks later, or not quite 4 weeks, but 3 weeks later, right before the holidays,
at the height of the news cycle, right?
Yes.
With the best opportunity to possibly use that information.
Right.
Okay.
Was I got from another person who was not Matt White anymore. It was Caitlin Madden. Mm-hmm. She attached all of the complaints, and voila, there was Garcia Hoven's complaint, and there was Dr. Holliday's complaint.
Who is Caitlin Madden?
She is a legal counsel that one of her job functions is opening open records requests.
Okay, then she works just for the ERD. Is that?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. Right. So she's. Sometimes we get open records request responses from the department itself, and sometimes we get them just from the ERD. There doesn't seem to be an obvious pattern in what that is, but I think they have their own sort of method of
and they
figuring
do
it
a
out.
lot of bouncing around too, because occasionally Mickey Keist was another person who chimed in on things. So there was a couple people who touched those records.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what you can take from that, but that's
right.
It's not always the same person. So okay, so it comes out on December 23rd, Christmas Eve here. And all right, but and just so we can sort of foreshadow what's going to come up here, that's certainly not the end of this case in terms of Matt White, and it's certainly not the end of Matt White in terms of the open records, right?
Correct.
Okay.
It's not the end of Matt White.
Okay, and I think that they were sort of hoping that it would be the end of it on December 23rd. Does that sound right?
I think they probably were like, here's what you've been asking for. Now, would you please leave us alone?
Okay. But that only raised more issues, I think, getting the Holiday complaint in and of itself.
Yeah, and if you have not seen that yet, that is a doozy.
Okay.
That is a doozy. Uh-huh.
So we'll have to share that with you. There's just always more. There's always more.
Always more.
So thank you very much for listening to this part of Debbie Kuether telling us her firsthand story of how she filed for public records with the Equal Rights Division, and how the Equal Rights Division took some time to produce those records. Thank you very much for
Thank you.